encourage us to do that, so thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Kevin. Greg?
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for your comments and letters and map. My question is, on our, within the process, on our next meeting that we have, will, at that point, the demographer start bringing forward a map
Yes.
or two?
Yes.
Could you, a little more to the next step in the process?
The next step, the next hearing will be the demographer presenting some number of maps to be determined by him, which reflect the population break and all the information which he received to these first two public hearings.
Thank you.
Thank you. As I agree with most everybody here, that this thing is just not right for our city. It's gonna tear us apart. It's gonna hurt our ability to govern and to provide quality services across the board. And one of the questions I had was the number of maps, and Andy, correct, this is probably at least gonna be 3 minimum, not more?
I don't know if it's true, but perhaps at least 2.
Yeah, I mean, it really, that's really the job of the demographer. That he's going to take a look at the information which was provided and give several options based upon different criteria. Could be 2, could be 3. As you know, the city of Mission Viejo, they had 18.
Don't want 18.
No, they didn't either, actually. Yeah.
One of the things, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if we don't develop a map process or write our own districts, who does that in the case that they force
Probably,
us to do this?
I guess theoretically, and it is theoretically, that if it were litigated and the city lost and we're directed to form districts, the court, I suppose, could do it based upon whatever evidence was presented at trial, or, I don't know, I'd be guessing, but it's just as likely the court would say you, city council, are ordered to adopt districts that meet the criteria of the statute and tell you to do it.
And as far as we know, the only city or case against this district in the state of California is out of the city of Poway. And do you have any update on that hearing? I know it's not until January.
Well, yeah, and that's not, remember, that in Poway, that's not quite the issue. The Poway has already agreed to do districts,
Correct.
but there is federal litigation challenging whether or not the California statute is unconstitutional in the face of the federal constitution.
But
And getting to your last question,
Okay.
the hearing will be on January the 18th.
Okay. At the last council meeting, Councilman Bash recommended that 2 council persons go along with the demographer when he gets in between going the maps. And as a show, because I think myself and Mayor Pro Tem Grunmeyer, we're gonna be doing that. And I know not against anybody else, but you guys are up for re-election. I don't want to show impartiality with the election. So I'll just, Robin and myself will be doing that. Just to make sure if this thing goes bad, that at least we showed impartiality on that. So, with that, I close the public hearing number 2 on this matter. And moving down to 5B.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item came brought forward to council for approval. One of the items that was under our attention this year is we have obviously a very old water infrastructure, and we've had some issues occur over the past year of certain areas repeatedly being inundated with sewer main breaks, water main breaks that have caused some significant heartache and issues for some residents. 2 primary areas is Valley View, between 3rd and 3rd, and the other area is on Shawnee. That one has had, I think, 6 or 7 main breaks over the last 2 years. One of the things that the city manager has tasked me to do is, even though neither of those locations were slated for improvement projects at this time, is to look at bringing those projects forward now to relieve some of those issues that are occurring and to get them under design and then get them built, whether that would be using water funds or potentially even if need be borrowing funds from the sewer fund, which we pay back in order to get those projects done now versus later. So this is one of the first 2 projects that we're bringing forward. I do have quotes going out, so you know, for repairing Valley View between 3rd and 3rd, which impacted nearby residents there. So we are moving a couple projects that are more priority up, and we are pushing some other projects that we have planned that are already designed, just not constructing them, so we can have funds available to these projects. So this is the first one we're moving forward for your approval at this time, which is just the design. We anticipate it to take about 4 to 6 months to complete the design for that project. It also will include full repavement of that road, since it's been damaged several times. So we're also not just doing the main and having a trench left. We're going to repave the entire road as part of a street improvement project too. So we're combining 2 projects into one. And the total cost at this time for those services is $35,525 for the engineering. And then we'll come back later on for once we have better, most likely towards the end of the budget year, we'll have a better idea of what money we have in the water fund to see if we can support constructing this project on its own, or we look at potentially using either interdepartmental funds to fund and get this project done. But we'll come forward back with that project when it comes to construction. This is just for design to move this project forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Does council have any questions of staff? Greg?
Thank you. Any overall engineer's estimate of the total project?
Not at this time. That's one of the things they'll develop.
I mean, I certainly support this proposal. So my question is this, the 12-inch that you're gonna run down Shawnee,
Correct.
is it a 12-inch in Corridon that you will connect to?
Yes.
And then Shawnee at this time is a,
I think it's a 8-inch.
okay. All right, so it's an 8-inch that we're gonna go to a 12. And then on Lasso Lane, that's a 6-inch, yeah, 6-inch in both streets.
Right.
And Lasso Lane will become an 8-inch. So my question is that, will there, do you think, Chad, that this would be a problem with increased pressure by increasing the lines, the main lines to the houses? I just want to make sure that the residents are not going to be saddled with the cost of, having to provide like backflows or pressure regulators.
This should have no impact on the current pressure that they have. It really should stay the same. The function of pressure isn't really based off the size of the pipe, because it's pretty much a static pressure that's always there provided by the system. So whether it's an 8 or a 12, it's not going to reduce or increase because of that.
You wouldn't see any fluctuation?
Nothing you would use that, because really the pressure is based off of where it's coming from. In this case, this area, it gets influx of pressure from nearby wells, and it's really depending if our wells operate at the time when we see slight fluctuations, but you're not going to see much of a change.
Okay.
No. They wouldn't have to put on backflow devices or pressure regulators. Really, this is just a function of it's a terrible pipe that's falling apart constantly, and when we're doing it, it's just better to upsize it because it helps with water quality and flow. It's kind of a restricted pipe for the demand through that area.
What's the material that's existing?
We believe it's CMLC.
Okay. And we're going ductile line.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Ken? Robin? Rowan? Well, Mr. Newton asked all the questions I got written down here, so I was worried about going from my 12-inch to the 8-inch down to 6, but trust your judgment. You both got the engineering sticker on your hat, so. Are there any cards on this?
No cards on this item.
Being there's no cards, this is a public hearing, so I'll close the public hearing, bring it back to council.
Motion to approve.
Motion from Councilmember Bash, seconded by Councilmember Newton. Please vote. passes unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on, this is 5C. Adoption of an ordinance amending the Norco Municipal Code adding section 9.97 use of facilities for political and First Amendment activities. Mr. Harper?
First, I'll address what's probably the elephant in the room. The reason we're here tonight has nothing to do with the circulation of term limit petitions. And in fact, if this ordinance were adopted, it would have no effect on that because it wouldn't be in effect until the circulation period is expired. So that's really irrelevant. But what the term limit petition circulation did was raise questions that had never been asked before about what the code provided with regard to First Amendment / political activities and the city's relationship with them. Because it never come up before, I think the city staff had, without thinking much about it, had thought that it was addressed in the Parks and Recreation provisions of the code, which deal with essentially use of parks and sidewalks and parking lots related to parks. But the definition isn't broad enough to address other areas. And in addition to that, First Amendment uses should get treated, and under the law do get treated more favorably than how we treat somebody who wants to utilize a park. And that was really the purpose for drafting an ordinance which could give staff some guidance about how to go about this. The ordinance that's proposed really does basically three things. One, it asks for notice of where the activity is intended to be, and it requires that the city make a timely decision, not as to whether or not it will occur, but whether the location is appropriate. What it does is allow this gives us the authority to designate an alternate location if the location that's proposed is a problem for one of two reasons: safety and interference or disruption with others' use of that particular area. That's it. Then finally, what it does is designate what areas are not permitted to be used for those types of activities. For example, I wouldn't suggest this, and please, Mike, don't, maybe you can plug your ears now. There is nothing in the code which says that you can't circulate a petition in the city manager's office or in the hallways of City Hall, even though I think everybody has assumed correctly that's the case, and there's never been any attempt to do that. But staff needs something which gives some direction with regard to that. With the petition circulating group, one of the first questions that was asked when the initial setup of the parking lot occurred was, point to me what regulation says where I can be and where I can't be. And that question is really what generated all of this, because we realized that there was nothing which addressed it particularly well. What is proposed tonight, there is no permit fee included, nor is there any insurance requirement. A permit fee, if there ever were one, would require the city to adopt and amend its permit ordinance.
That's exactly what they're doing.
The only potential for insurance is some large activity which would result in liability to the city. The classic example, which some of you probably remember, was in Illinois when the Ku Klux Klan wanted to march down the main street, and the city said, well, okay, I mean, that's the First Amendment activity. You're entitled to do that, but we want you to pay for officers and we want to have insurance. And the courts, after litigation, said, yeah, under those circumstances, there was a significant exposure of liability to the city, and therefore they were permitted to require insurance. As a practical matter, given the areas where you are excluded from doing, there is we almost no circumstance other than a large event which would insurance would ever be an issue. In addition, the ordinance as proposed applies only to, it doesn't apply to non-city events. If if a group rented Nellie Weaver to hold a political activity, they can do that. If the League of Women Voters sponsors candidates night, they can do that. If the fair, as they have in the past, allow booths for candidates, they can do that. None of that's addressed by this. It's simply city uses of its business buildings. And with that, again, this is a public hearing, and the purpose is to get your input and council's input, and make a determination of what's appropriate or amend the ordinance accordingly. If you have any questions, council, I'm happy to answer.
Council, any questions of staff, the city attorney? Frank? Kevin? Rob? Okay, Rowan? Okay. This is a public hearing. I'm going to remind the speakers it is 3 minutes, and please stay on topic. This is about what's on the agenda, and so with that, slide clerk. Any cards?
Yes, Betsy Roberts.
Good evening, Betsy.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councilperson, staff. My name is Betsy Roberts. I've lived in Norco with my family for 35 years, so I've been here through no freeway, kids growing up, the whole enchilada. I did want to come tonight because I read over the weekend about what we discussed here, and I'm thinking, why do we need this? And then hearing your explanation, because in my head I'm thinking, okay, every time we have candidates up at Ingles Park, I've helped up there sometimes with booths and so forth, which is definitely political. I've attended candidate forums there, and so those would be exceptions. So it doesn't make sense to me why we would need this additional clarification to lay out for certain groups of folks where they could or could not meet. If we had issues with unruly groups, protests, people creating issues, then I could say, okay, maybe it's indicated. But at this point, in my view of the universe, and I do follow things after work and on weekends and so forth, it just seems like unnecessary. And every day, at least in my experience, be it Norco, the state or federal government, we're being told more and more what we can't do, okay? So I'm getting very stressed out. I'm a child of the 60s. I wasn't protesting then, but I know we've all worked really hard for the freedoms that we have. And so to just have this additional language and so forth as a matter of law just really bothers me. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening, Council. As a taxpayer, there's a wee bit of the city that belongs to me. But since this code amendment and the timing of it is extremely incidental compared to what you say, this amendment deals specifically with petitions. It's in the staff report. And while it's currently an ongoing ballot initiative that is circulating the petitions in the town, I would request that Mayor Hoffman and Councilman Bash recuse themselves from this code amendment, as they both published on social media their displeasure with this initiative process that is currently circulating in the city. And therefore, their impartiality is in serious doubt. Mayor Hoffman has stated, as you see there on document number 1, that he will never comment on an issue prior to a hearing. But his comments on the issues clear back to July.
Mr. Thompson,
Mr.
Mr. Thompson, can you,
It's my
Mr.
time.
Thompson,
It's
I
my
understand,
time.
can you stay on the topic at hand,
My
dealing
time.
with the...
You have stated on your
comment.
events page, as has Councilman Bash repeatedly, on his newsletter, and I've given the examples to the city attorney of this petitions and this initiative process. I would also like to ask the Riverside Sheriff if this code was implemented, exactly what their response would be to a person at a city park collecting signatures. Are you wasting our tax money? What would their response be? And in response to that signature gathering. So that's what I have to say on this.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Jeff Kahan.
Good evening, John.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I think you know me well enough that you know how much I love our country, how much I defend our Constitution and its principles, and I'm also an appointee on the commission that serves the city, so I've got a little bit of a conflict. But if there's going to be a conflict, I would ask that we fall on the side of the First Amendment. The way that this ordinance is written, and I'm not taking any sides on any particular issue that may or may not be present at the moment, because there could be future petitions or issues that will come months, years down the road, so I'm at a higher level. I'm just concerned with some of the language. I want to be sure that we're not being so specific. Part of the ordinance talks about distribution of materials. Now, I consider that fairly passive, but yet there's a possibility of disruption. And I know that's going to be a very subjective issue. So does one person saying, hey, that bothers me, that we step in and say we can't do that? That seems to be a little bit subjective, and I don't know where you can draw that line of what is a disruption if it's simply passing out materials, whether it's petition signing or anything else.
You know, basically the disruption is conflict between competing users. So if you have a softball game and somebody's wondering if the softball game passing stuff, we wouldn't allow that. That's the kind of conflict that would be. It's
But I don't-
competing users, it's
right.
not whether somebody didn't get along with it.
Unfortunately, I only have a minute left, so I can't debate that.
Apologize for interrupting.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. I'm just pointing out the fact that I don't know that I wouldn't consider that a disruption myself. The other issues, the wording on the last paragraph says, notwithstanding the foregoing, no person shall circulate any petition, solicit any person to sign of any nature, blah, blah, blah. And we talked about that. You said if the fair rents out Ingalls Park, then they can do that. That language didn't seem very clear to me in that section, that with the exception of when rented or, whatever. So I'd like to see that maybe amended a little bit to be more clear. I'm not too sure I like the part about sidewalks surrounding and adjacent areas. Where do we draw the line? I mean, if you're not on city property, you're also saying you can't be adjacent to it or in the surrounding areas. I mean, there's got to be some specific boundaries of what. So what can we clear up on adjacent and boundaries? I mean, I understand people are at an event, they're there for a certain reason and at a park or a specific use. I get that, but our country's history is the fact that sometimes you have to deal with things that you don't necessarily agree with. Some things that are maybe a little bit uncomfortable because somebody has an opposing view. And sometimes we're on one side and we don't want people putting stuff in our face, and sometimes we're on the side where we want to distribute the materials because we feel strongly about an issue. So I want to make sure that not only are the current people protected, I'm also protecting any future issues that come down the road. I don't want to see Norco become so, draconian that we can't, as a freedom-loving, we're trying to protect our town with this district issue, and yet we've got something here that I think it's a little too tight. I'd like to see it loosened up a little bit where we're not infringing on our Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Harvey Sullivan.
Good evening again, Harvey.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor, and Again, I came down here specifically tonight to speak about this item. I'm neither opposed to it nor I'm in favor of it tonight. Just a little while ago, you postponed another one about some houses being built to clarify some things, and I'm here tonight to ask you, this ordinance is a little bit scary. I'm all about rights and property rights, First Amendment rights, and the right to assembly and all of that type of stuff, but I can certainly understand if the Ku Klux Klan came in and you were having a little league baseball game over there and they were standing in the middle of the field, that would not be something that we would want to happen. But I'm also concerned about the sidewalks and the adjacent areas and things of that nature that's in the ordinance. What I would like to suggest, and would hope you would be open to it, was put this off, maybe 1 or 2 meetings. Your next meeting is January 17th. And why don't we have these town hall meetings about every 3 months? And why don't we educate people like me and some of the rest of the audience here tonight on what this ordinance is about? You know, when you're talking about your First Amendment rights and your property and your rights to do things, it's kind of scary. And to kind of, I understand that there's a lot of safety issues involved in it. It might set up in a parking lot, someone might run over. You know, I'm more concerned about getting run over on 6th Street than 7th Street and 5th Street than I am about that. So I don't think there's really any hurry to do this. It's Christmas time. A lot of people may not know about it yet, so I would please ask you to put this off. Let's have a town hall meeting, and let's have a great discussion about it and what it's going to impact and how it's going to impact. And if it's the way John explained it, and it's not impacting our rights the way he explained it, I have no problem with it. But if it is, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
Sandy and Prairie.
Good evening, Sandy.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council, and staff. A lot of what I was going to say tonight, I'm putting aside after I had an opportunity to hear the discussion. And I respect a lot of the valid points that you guys are bringing forth, and that there could be a group, like Harvey mentioned, that could come in and be harmful or detrimental to our activities and our personal lifestyle. But when it comes to a city ballot initiative, or something that's directly related to this town, in this case, term limits. I understand we're not talking about term limits in this, but I'm going to use it as my example. I would like to know if there's, in changing the wording of this code, if there could be some type of a wording that allows a little bit more of a liberal leeway when it is a city initiative brought forth by the residents of the town, for the town. And then I have another 2 cents that I'd like to add. I did do a little bit of research on my own, and I thought I would make a sampling of phone calls. So I called five cities this week. I called the city of Sacramento. I called the city of Los Angeles. I called the city of Riverside. I also called the city of Corona, and I called the city of Eastville. Of all 5 cities that I called, not one of them have created any type of special wording in their municipal code pertaining to anything of what we're discussing tonight. Of all 5 cities that I talked to, I have the right, if I was a member of that community, to go stand on their city hall steps and have petitions signed. Of all 5 cities that I spoke to, not one of them would require me to have a permit to do that as a resident bringing forth a city initiative. And so I'd just like you to take that into consideration also. And like Harvey said, I think, and Robin has said before, sometimes we rush a little bit too quickly to put something on the table, have the discussion, and then make the decision. And in this case, I think certainly that we're rushing a little bit too quickly on this. You guys maybe have all had time to discuss and understand quite a bit more. But as a resident, just getting my email, the agenda, it doesn't really explain a lot. So it was very enlightening to hear the discussion. But now we need time to kind of absorb it a little bit, and for you guys to take in our comments, and then tweak it a little bit. And with the time of the year being the holidays and some breaks coming up, I don't see that there's an urgency. And as John mentioned, that even if you did move forward to make a decision, it would have no bearing on the current process of residents going out for petition circulation. So if we could all just kind of think about what everybody said, have some further discussion, allow a little bit more input, and then kind of talk about it again, I think that would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yes, I changed my name.
I'm gonna say, you're not Merton. Hi, Lou.
No, she has a
The other one.
terrific headache right now. Good evening,
It's
Mayor,
not you, right?
council, and I'm usually the cause of that. Now, give me some more time.
All right.
Okay, considering sidewalks, the Supreme Court has said that public sidewalks are traditional public forums that are held in trust for the use of the public for purposes of communicating thoughts between citizens and discussing public questions. The government may not ban petitioning on sidewalks, and it may not require petitioners to obtain a permit. It may only establish reasonable rules, such as rules against blocking pedestrian traffic or the entrance to buildings and parking lots, and rules against setting up tables on sidewalks. California in 1979, in the case of Robbins versus Pruneyard Shopping Center, the California Supreme Court determined that soliciting signatures for a petition to the government is an activity protected by the California Constitution. Subsequent cases pulled back from that level of certainty, but in December of 2007, by a slim margin, in the case of Fountain Valley Mall versus the National Labor Relations Board, that court appears to have asserted that free speech rights supersede private property rights. Laws governing petition circulators are an active area of legislation and legal action. In general, proponents of additional restrictions on circulations say that the laws work to guard the integrity of the petition process, while opponents of additional regulations say the laws are A, unconstitutional, and B, an attempt by politicians to put a veneer of respectability on recurrent and multifaceted attempts to squelch initiative processes. Once again, the government may not require petitioners to obtain a permit. So I would ask, no, I would beg that you not even consider forcing anyone to have a permit to practice their First Amendment rights. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no more cards on this item.
Close the hearing and bring it back to council. And John, when you start off, a couple of questions were asked by the, is there anything that comes to your mind is on this, no questions posed by the speakers?
Well, actually, Lou's comments kind of point out how ever-changing this area of the law is. For example, the old Supreme Court decision with regard to sidewalks pertains to public sidewalks in general. It does not apply to sidewalks and entry to a city hall, which is all this ordinance addresses. I mean, if you march up and down the few places in Norco that actually have sidewalks, and you're tied up to it. The Pruneyard case and those that followed it, that's not, as a practical matter, very good law anymore. There was a California Supreme Court case that was decided, yeah, it was decided about a month ago, but I'm trying, or whether it was the U.S. or California Supreme Court. The state of the law has generally been, because you've seen them all at Ralph's or any other grocery store, that there are little tables and petitioners and people seeking signatures. And the Supreme Court in the initial Ralph's case held that that was sufficient to constitute a public forum and was permitted. The most recent case is cut that substantially. saying that if the purpose of the sidewalk is a private sidewalk simply to ingress and egress the store, that there isn't that right. If the store has those areas where there are tables and chairs and things like that, it's okay in that area, just not okay on the sidewalk nor in the entrance of the store. The point being that the area of the law has changed. This, I can't speak for the council exactly, but I can speak for myself, but there's no intention to diminish anyone's First Amendment rights. And in fact, we talked about the disruption. The disruption is the potential up front. It's not what actually occurred. It's not a conflict between two groups or people. It's if a group which wants to set up a table someplace comes to the city first and says, here's where I want to do it. The city says, well, yeah, that works, or no, it doesn't, because only two reasons. One, the potential disruption of the activities of others that are using that location, or two, safety. Those are there's no prohibition of the speech. In fact, the ordinance calls out that the speech, the nature of the speech and the content of the speech can't be a criteria for making a decision about whether or not, even as to location. Doesn't mean, however, that there are not areas which of the ordinance is drafted like anything else, based upon your comments tonight and comments from the council, that can be modified to make certain that what we're really doing is providing a safe and secure place for First Amendment rights to be exercised without interfering with the business of the city, or interfering with people that shouldn't be a part of it, that, for example, inside the seniors. That's basically it, but happy to take in any input, and based upon it, we will modify the accordingly. Just whatever it is, we just need to establish some codified basis for going forward.
Greg, any comments?
I was hoping you were going to start at the other end.
I did it to me plenty of times.
So John, I guess a little bit on like time, place, manner, is that where we're trying to go with this ordinance? That is allowable?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, my concern is that, and in a sense it makes me sad, that we've gotten to this point. My gut feeling is this is an overreaction to, that we don't even really need to be here discussing this item. I understand staff concerns when Mr. Thompson at the first farmer's market or whatever, you know, showed me in the code where it says that, and obviously it didn't, so I appreciate the concern of staff that, okay, we need to codify something. You know, and I'm trying to think back of, you know, more of the community, and then I had a discussion with the city attorney that we used to process a lot of permits through San Bernardino County, and you've been at San Bernardino Court. Well, there's a guy right outside the front door that reads the Bible all day long, and who cares? And I think the last thing, and it's, I hate division in our community, you know, we should be fighting together and standing together. And so I'm going to leave it with some institutional knowledge, and I hate to bother Steve with it, but in the early 2000s, I was on planning at the time at the corner of 6th and Temescal. Before Dr. Wells built her facility, we had a building there that at first was medicinal marijuana. It came to the Planning Commission knowing that this was Horsetown, USA, and they changed the name of the business to Medicinal Marijuana and Western Wear. And I know Steve remembers that, and so does John, but the thing that stuck in my mind was that Granny Lewis, former council member, and some other residents protested this building and this business. And they were at the opposite corner of 6th and Temescal, where Dr. Wan's is now. Nobody cared. And I'll guarantee you that the city didn't require them a permit, but it was community, it was our own residents. And that's where I like to keep it with, that whether it's term limits or medicinal marijuana and Western wear, I don't care. That's about all I have to say. I do have a different type of motion after the rest of the council gets to speak.
Kevin?
Well, for me, I'm kind of along the same lines. My big concern is don't do it in parking lots because everybody says, gee, it won't happen. Well, guess what? I happened to be a coach once. Somebody turned, was talking to somebody else, a kid ran out, thank God I was standing there, I caught her before that kid got hit by a car. It doesn't happen till it happens. So I have concerns about that, and I have concerns about entrances into people's businesses where they're making livelihoods. And I have concerns about City Hall running smoothly. Other than that, knock yourself out. I do think there needs, I don't really like the idea of a permit. I do think that working together is to understand the fabric of the society. Don't abuse another person's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's one of the things that I am concerned about. But other than that, knock yourself out.
Robin?
I have quite a few concerns with the way the ordinance is written right now. When I think about this ordinance, I think about some of the requirements are here, and I think about the anti-bullying little march that members of the district office do every year on the anti-bullying day. I think about, God forbid it ever happen, but the teachers union decides to strike and we're on the sidewalk in front of Norco High School. I think about people that aren't happy with maybe a way a business is conducting their business and they want to march up and down the sidewalk in front of that business. That's our right as an American to be able to do that. And I think the way that this particular ordinance is written, it's not clearly stated that the intent was to look specifically at city properties or city-sponsored events. So I don't like the way that the ordinance is written. I love that Norco cares so much about what goes on in this town, that there's passionate people on both sides. I love that because I think of the alternative and people that are apathetic and don't care and how kind of depressing that would be. And so I just want us to be aware that I think there's a better way to go about doing this. And I don't think this is where it needs to be. I know some of the speakers talked about going back and tweaking it and making some modifications, and I'm definitely open to that because, you know, I don't need to be in Andy's office collecting signatures to have more rights for chickens or whatever I wanted to get petitions for. So I think some clarification on those types of things would definitely be okay and give staff the direction that they needed. So I think revisiting this and thinking it through a little bit better would be in the best interest of everybody in our town.
No, I don't like this ordinance either. In fact, I wanted to continue it today until we tweak some of the paragraphs in there. But, I don't have a problem with anybody, using a city sidewalk. I've seen it before in cities that actually had sidewalks. We don't have too many. But, I think they just need to be careful. If there's not room there, just don't step out in the street. I'd hate to think of you, or anybody, gathering signatures down here on Hamler by Fifth at the little Mexican food place that step out the front door and you'll all get took out by a vehicle, you know, I mean, that's kind of what we have, but, I just don't think this ordinance will work. I think if the people work together with the city, if they need to go tell the city where they're gonna be, that's fine. I don't believe in charging a fee for a permit or anything like that, because it is their right to, freedom of speech. And, I know I was involved in a deal back in the early 90s, a lot bigger than this committee, what they're trying to do here, that, people that try to take our freedom of speech away, and we went to the, ACLU, and it took 3 years, but it went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and we won on the freedom of speech thing. So I have a hard time taking people's rights away to speak and rights to gather your signatures. If you get the signatures, we have to go on the ballot, so be it. If you don't, well, you tried. And I think we could all get along in here and everything, and hopefully everybody will. Like they said, this is a Christmas season, and I don't want to be the Grinch. So,
Too late.
yeah, I probably am, man. No, I got a Santa Claus hat on. Anyway, that's my feelings. I don't like the ordinance. If we have to bring it back and rewrite it to make it usable for everybody, I think that's the way to do it. If not, I think we'll just let it go. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruin. As a veteran, and as someone who wore the green and tan for 26 years, I tell you, I believe in the First Amendment and your freedom of speech. But at the same time, I also understand where staff's concern are about public safety and direction needed on this item. A lot of good presentations, and I appreciate all the comments by all the speakers on this article, and plus all my fellow council persons. But I know that staff needs help on this because they need direction on what happens when it comes up. 2018 will be an election year. We're looking at some serious issues throughout our state and the nation, and we also have the county wanting to do some stuff. We're going to be looking at some stuff, and we have to give staff some direction as to what happens when two opposing uses come up. And I think that's where we need to be. I'm agreeing with the rest of my council members that we need to maybe send this back to the drawing board, as they say, to come up with something that's equitable and plausible for that. And I think the city attorney and staff can do that. Our problem is not just here in our city. And it's like Sandy said, she called around. This issue was brought up right after the Berkeley riots over free speech. You had Sacramento and the legislators up there. They had several hearings. They couldn't come up with an answer on it because they were afraid to determine where do you draw the line for public safety, protection of public property, and the free speech. They couldn't come up with an answer either. So I'm hoping that, and I see John wanting to say something to me about air and want to add anything. So John, do you have anything further to add on this thing?
I think that from staff's point of view, that what we really need is direction about areas more that, so that we have some authority not to allow people to circulate petitions in Andy's office, for example. The sidewalk comment, the only reference to sidewalks are those sidewalks which are physically attached to the building. But that said, and somebody suggested we clarified, at least for now, unless there are problems on a go-forward basis, that I'd strike everything in the ordinance until the final paragraph and reword the final paragraph to say, no person shall circulate any petition or solicit any person to sign any petition of any nature or conduct political or First Amendment activities of any kind in the city hall, at any city-sponsored activity in the community centers, senior center, George Ingles Equestrian Event Center, any city-owned parking lot based on safety consideration, or any other building open to and used by the public for transacting public business, and strike that, nor in any city-sponsored parade or event. And that's it, and that gives at least staff some ability to say, you can't do it here, but without ever having to reach the issue of where else you can do it. If it's in a park, it's going to be under the existing park ordinance in any case.
Public parks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's basically to keep whatever organization or group or person it might be from disrupting others who are trying to transact normal business in the city, because the city is actually a business as well.
Andy?
But that's just me talking. I mean, you can ignore the whole thing.
Andy, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, and that is the direction that city staff is looking for.
First they said, oh, no,
Obviously, using an example of collecting petitions in the city manager's office is an extreme example. I don't think that's going to happen. Okay. But the
Well, now.
the real example is, would folks be allowed, for example, to set up and collect signatures or petitions in front of the senior center, as an example?
yes.
Again, city staff is looking for direction to such questions.
Yes.
If the city wants to adopt that as a policy and say, yes, it's okay, folks can set up anywhere in front of any city building or any city parking lot to engage in political activities and collect signatures. So we just need to have that codified or accepted as a formal policy of the city council. This is not about city staff. We're looking for something that we can rely on to manage to.
No, you don't. It's a loss.
Greg, you have any thoughts on that?
Saying you want to do it.
Yeah, I guess I could.
Do it, Greg.
I understand the concern, all right, that staff has. But then it just becomes more rules,
Yep.
more laws. And I think we just get to a point where we're just overdoing it. It's, John, let's just go back to the San Bernardino County, the guy that does the Bible, okay? Sits out there and reads the Bible. Doesn't bother anybody, just right there, people are going in and out, but he doesn't go inside, all right? Now, is there something did they have to have an ordinance to say you can't read the Bible inside the court or the county building? Because it would be disruptive?
The answer is whether they do or not, I can't tell you. The answer is theoretically yes.
Okay.
I mean, I mean, you shift the burden to the county to show you're trespassing, but how is somebody talking when everybody talks in the front of the courthouses or standing in
Right.
line? How is that impermissible? I'm certain the county courthouse is probably a bad example because the courthouse has kind of their own set of regulations, but.
Who's been in front of the county building
But
though,
the county,
too,
but the
so-
county building, yeah, but the county building, I doubt that San Bernardino County has something, but I may be wrong. It says you can't do it inside the building, but in order to prevent somebody from doing it inside the building, you have to find some basis. And we don't have that basis, which is the language that I revised. The intention was to prohibit it from essentially buildings that the city is transacting business inside the building.
So if somebody wanted to set up a table and get signatures in front of the senior center, I don't care. I mean, they should be allowed to. Point being, I guess, then that would be extreme. Do they want to go inside the senior center, okay, to collect signatures? Then I think you're not really a class act. You should go inside the senior center to help the seniors, okay?
Right.
But to be outside, it doesn't offend me. And I think you have that right. And I guess that's all I can really say on that matter.
So just speaking for yourself, that tweaking the language which I just read to make it clear that it's inside those facilities?
I would like to see more discussion on that, but if you wanted some direction, I would say maybe inside is something that I think we should discuss. So it would not be disruptive to the business that's being conducted. I mean, at the end of this discussion, my feeling is to make a motion to take this item off calendar. And I think that I liked Mr. Sullivan's suggestion, and if it's possible time-wise, is maybe this is something we discuss at a town hall. Get a little more input to see what would be, palatable with all of us. I mean, we all live in the same community. That's about it.
Kevin? Robin?
I agree with Greg.
Burton?
I don't have a problem with them setting up out in the parking lots or the front of the city buildings or anything. I hate to see them disrupt the activities over at the seniors, anybody, I'm not talking about any specific group, but anybody going in there to collect signatures, because some of those people, when they get involved in their activities, like bingo or checkers or whatever it is, they don't like to be disturbed. So, they might be taking a knife in your own hand. I don't have any problem with it. You think I'm kidding, man, you go where I'm disturbing people when they're playing bingo, and you walk out there looking like Chad O'Hare. Anyway, I don't have any problem with them out in front, just kind of be polite and stay out of everybody's way. And like I said, I'm not referring to any group, I'm talking about every group. That's all I have, thank you.
Thank you, Berwin. Based on what my fellow council people are saying, it looks like we need to go do a little more homework on this and tweak it.
And you need to just drop.
Andy, if we could have maybe Mayor Pro Tem Grunmeyer and Councilman Newton come down and work with staff and the city attorney and see if we can bring this back. If that's, bring it and work on it and do some changes to it, so.
Just drop it.
Is that a possibility?
Yeah, sure, that's the direction of the city council.
Oh, I think that would be one direction.
I'm not sure what is that.
This is another example of avoiding too.
Yeah, so. I think we got.
I make a motion that we just table this all together, just let it go.
Amen.
Go ahead and second that with a question
Back on my
or discussion.
dude.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay.
You did table it, so.
So my discussion item is more of a question to Kevin. Do you want to just take this off calendar, or do you just want to
Scrap it.
I think just take out calendar, I think we've given them great ideas where to put their tables and stuff. I think
Yes.
that's